Right, just playing around with fitting the distributor. Obviously there's no proper cap because I'm using coil-on plugs, so it's all controlled by the ECU. But we've hit a snag. There we go. The distributor's got to sink down quite a bit more. Probably, I don't know, 3-4 mil, but it can't go down 3 or 4 mil because if we look in there, don't know if you can see, I'll try and point it out with my finger. It's actually, we've got 2 waterways, 1 and 2, and the body is actually sitting on the boss of where the waterway is. So I'm going to have to do a bit of machining on the intake manifold to allow the distributor to drop down. Right, so I've now finally made up my specialist bolts to go in there. So we've got a plain shank running through, which runs on the rose joint, and the thread is just long enough that the shank doesn't bind into that side there. So I have to order up some longer bolts than needed and cut the thread off. That was the only way to get the plain shank bit. That's a cheap way of doing it. So I've done all 4 of those. That one's in. I've just got to fit the other 3 now. Right, this is a bit more on the dry sump system. Now that's where the oil filter normally screws onto, and the bit that sticks out is the input. So what I've got to do is remove that, which I've already loosened, so that I can make a connection to it to bring a -12 pipe to it. So I've already loosened that one off. So we take him out. So that's removed that part. Now the thread that goes into the block, I think they call it 1 1/16 inch, which is -12. So I've purchased, I'll just lay it there so you can see it. So I've purchased a -12 to -12 union and then machined off the end. Otherwise, if we leave that end there, that will bottom out and stop the oil flow when it goes in. The actual distance I've got going into the hole is 20 millimeters deep. So what I've done is I've machined off, as you can see, an amount on there, and I've also put a chamfer on the input. So I've got about 12 millimeters protruding there, so that leaves me a good 8 millimeters inside before it bottoms out, so that should be okay for the flow. Now when I screw this in, I'm going to put some, where are we, Loctite around the thread, and then up this end of the thread I'm going to put some silicone sealant so that the Loctite will lock it in and seal it, and then as belt and braces there'll be silicone at this end. So I'll go ahead and do that now. Right, so that's that now screwed on tightly, and that will allow me now to put a -12 oil union on there. So that's the -12 screwed on. So that's going to be my input. So the oil pump will drive out through the filter and then back in to that point there. The actual scavenge on the pump will go through the oil cooler and then back to the tank. And then the oil feed to the pump obviously comes from the bottom of the tank. I really wanted to use a sandwich plate there, but as we'll see in a moment, because I've had to bring the oil pump further back towards the back of the engine, it interferes with the sandwich plate. So this was the easiest way of doing it. So we'll show you that next. Right then, after a lot of faffing around, I've managed to get the dry sump oil pump in. It hasn't actually gone on the brackets as it was designed, because that would have brought the pump too far forward. So I've had to move it back. As we can see, we had a bit of an interference problem between the pump and that pipe there. It meant that the pump couldn't come up to tension the belt. So I've just ground a little bit off the, I don't know if you can see that, off the nut and the back cover very, very slightly. So that allows me to pivot the pump up. I've also decided that I'm going to not fit the electric water pump where it was, because it just makes things so difficult to get to. So I'm going to make up a flange to pick up there and a flange to pick up there, tee them together there, and then take that pipe off down to the front of the car, where I'll have an electric water pump up the front end. And I'll run through 1.5 inch pipes. So it'll be 1.5 inch up to here, and that will then split into 1 inch T going each way. So I'm going to pick up the bracket they supply, will pick up here, so there'll be a flange in there. And obviously I'll have to make up spacers so they end up with a nice fit between there and there. I've obviously got to put spacers in there as well. But quite pleased how it's all gone in. And that then leaves me with a double fan belt there. I call it a fan belt, which is going to drive the aircon pump. And the theoretical is to put the alternator up here higher, which I'll just put in position. Right, let me move over to the aircon pump and alternator. So my plan here is to run a belt from the outer pulley there down to the outer one on there, up over the alternator and back, and then use the alternator as the tensioner. So all that remains to be seen on that one is just how the hell I make brackets to hold that in. Obviously I've got various places I can come off of. I've got some major points I can pick up off the head there. And I've got points I can pick up off the cover there. Not a lot to go down to the bottom area. So it's going to have to be some strange bracket coming off of here, going out to there maybe to go down to support the aircon pump. Obviously there's no room on this side to do it, because we're all taken up by the dry sump pump. But yeah, we'll get there one way or the other. And then up here, because I want a heater, what I'm going to do up here is blank off the 2 holes there. And then we've got that one, which is the intake side. And then we've got another little one there, which is after the thermostat, because the thermostat goes across there. So water pressure comes in. So all this is pressurized. Thermostat is shut. So the flow will be through there up to the heater radiator, and then we'll come back and go into that area there. Okay, when the thermostat opens, then general water flow is going to be that direction rather than through the heater, and I can live with that. And at the heater end, I put a Ford Focus bypass hose assembly, which is operated by a solenoid. So in one position, the water actually goes through the heater radiator. And then when you operate the solenoid, it shuts off the heater radiator and connects it to the return pipe. So it's a straight out and then back in again. So that will keep my coolant flow going. So obviously when it comes back into there, it then goes round and off to the radiator. But obviously in the middle of all this, I've also got to put a swirl pot. So that's got to be plumbed in as well. So still a long way to go, but I can see possibly the light at the end of the tunnel on sorting this end out. There's one other area which It's easy to show. Oh, sorry to move the camera around a lot, but I don't have a GoPro with fancy stabilization. As you can see, the actual bolt that holds all the spigot or the pulleys on is pretty close to the chassis here. In fact, if you view from on top, I think you can see the bolt is forward of the chassis. So what I'm going to be doing here is when I take the engine out, this member here, let's come down here so you can see it better. There we go. This particular member here, I'm going to cut up, remove the back of it, drop another piece of steel in there, so we end up with not a square tube, but a oblong tube. That will then give me clearance for the bolt. It's just all a bit too close. I'm not happy with that. But that should be okay. Got no problems with that. The engine's fairly solidly mounted. What I may do is put a brace from the engine back to the chassis. So I don't know where from at the moment, but sort of from there going back at an angle, and do that on both sides. So there's no way the engine can move backwards and forwards, but can rock if it wants to. So a couple of rose joints at each end will sort that out. That's a standard thing which I did on the racing car and when I relocated the engine. So that's about it. That's as far as we got at the moment. I think I'm going to probably shut myself down now for Christmas and then get back on it in the new year. I mean, if anyone else has got any ideas, would be grateful. So there we go, open to suggestions.